Hey everyone, it's Matt Harper, and again, we're going live here so that we can get some interaction, some questions answered. And I'm here with Tammy Bauer, who is an estate attorney. And as we get started, Tammy, why don't you share a little bit about you, your background, and then we'll dive more into the estate planning and just kind of what it is and how it affects real estate.
Okay. So I've been doing estate planning for about 12 years now. And my background is mostly in estate planning, probate, trust administration, and guardianships and conservatorships. We also do some family law, which is interesting how they intersect into the estate planning world. So that's always good to have that background too.
Yeah. Yeah, so, for those that may not understand exactly what estate planning is, and I'm sure it's a very broad topic, what's the kind of 30,000-foot view, the Reader's Digest version of kind of what it is that you do and who might need to look at doing estate planning?
Okay. So everybody should look at doing estate planning. None of us are getting out of here alive, I don't think, unless they come up with some new technology. So we all need it. A lot of times the misconception is if we don't have a lot of assets, we don't need estate planning, but that's not true. A typical estate plan includes 6 documents. It would be your will, and the will not only says where you want your assets to go after you're gone, but also who you would want to serve as your personal representative, which is what Colorado calls an executor. And that's the person who's going to make your funeral arrangements, have access to make those arrangements, talk to the funeral home. So we want to name somebody for that. Usually includes a separate memorandum, which is where we dispose of tangible personal property, like a piece of jewelry or the grandfather clock. And then a financial power of attorney, a medical power of attorney, and then the living will or advanced medical directive, which is where you can specify how long you want to be on life support, should you find yourself in that situation. Yeah. And then the disposition of last remains, which is where you can elect to be cremated, buried, what kind of funeral service you want. So that's a typical estate plan without a trust.
Okay. So a lot of different pieces as it goes to it, and really planning for it up front so that those that are dealing with it after the fact don't have to fight and bicker as to what mom or dad or grandma or grandpa's plans may have or wishes may have actually been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's a gift.
Yeah. Personally, I remember many years ago with a great grandmother that passed away, the money seemed to have a conflict between family members. And I'm sure you hear or see some of that happen in estate planning.
Yeah. Fortunately, the vast majority of our probates are very simple and uncontested, but the ones that are contested are typically due to poor planning.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So what are the different, as it relates to the real estate and the real estate, the real property, the house, the rental properties, whatever that might look like, what kind of estate planning should we be planning for?
Yeah. So in all of our estate plans, we pull the O&E on any real property that you own and verify how you own title. I would say 3 out of 10 married couples are holding title as tenants in common rather than joint tenants accidentally. And so what that means is if one spouse were to pass away, we would have to open up probate to transfer their half interest in the real property to the other spouse. So if we find that situation, we just do a quick claim deed, put it into joint tenancy, so we make sure they have the rights of survivorship and we don't have to worry about probate.
Wow, so about 30% of married couples are holding title a different way than they would have intended to if they would have known.
Right.
Wow.
Because Colorado defaults to tenants in common, so unless it says joint tenancy on the title, it's tenants in common. So the problem is just the title company, the title agent just grabbed the most recent one that they did, filled it in, changed out the address, and it could be wrong.
Yeah, so, and to go a little deeper, the tenants in common, if I die, my wife and I own a home, right? If I die, my half of my real estate or whatever the portion is goes to my heirs and not necessarily to my wife, versus joint tenants. If I die, she gets complete ownership of the property.
Well, it'd probably still go to your wife unless you had a will trying to give it to somebody else. Because in the laws of, if you didn't have a will, the laws of intestacy, she would still inherit. But the only way to transfer real property out of somebody's name after they pass away is to open probate. Yeah. So it's a 6-month probate process. You're looking at $3,500 to $5,000 in costs instead of $13 to record a quitclaim deed to put it into joint tenancy.
It's going to save some people a lot of money to at least look into it as to what's going on there.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, and I'd like to go back to it a little bit more about trusts and holding title maybe in a trust other than my own name. So what can you share on that?
Yeah. One option to avoid probate is to use a trust. So what we might do is, instead of it being in you and your wife's name, is put it in the name of the trust. And then the trust just specifies after the two of you passes away, it goes to your children or wherever you want it to go. Okay. And so since it's owned by the trust, we never have to open probate.
Got it. So, for just hypothetical, right? My wife and I, we've got a young son. He's now 8 months old. If we were to put that in the trust instead of in our individual names, what exactly would happen with the real estate?
So it'd be sold, and then the proceeds would be used to care for your son. All of your assets is what you'd want, right? All of it's going to go into this trust. The trust money is used to care for your son till he reaches some age, and that age is up to you. And then we start making distributions to him for however long the money lasts. Yeah,
very cool. So what are some common mistakes that people make, other than just not planning for it?
Right.
Well, what are some common mistakes that you see that people are making?
So what we'll see is that people will name maybe their brother as a designated beneficiary on their accounts and on their life insurance, knowing that their brother is going to be the one to take care of their kids if they weren't there. And so then the problem then is that brother inherits all this money, gets a divorce. His ex-wife takes half of that trust money now because it's a marital asset. It was in his name. Or brother gets in a car accident, gets sued by a personal injury attorney, and the money's taken. So that's the purpose of the trust, is to make sure that the money's only used for your kids and doesn't get distributed to somebody else.
So a lot of different ways that they kind of set up one plan, but it ends up going another direction as we don't really think about the big picture and the what ifs.
Right. Yeah, lots of what ifs.
And that seems to be really a lot of what it is that you do, is planning for the what ifs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've seen so much. And so the more you see, the more you can plan for. And that's always my soapbox speech, is when you go looking for an estate planning attorney, make sure they do probate. Make sure they've seen the other side of it. They've seen how their work comes out, because we adjust our documents all the time for things that we run into.
Yeah. I mean, as a real estate agent, is there anything in particular that I should be having conversations with my clients on as it relates to estate planning and estate attorneys?
Yeah, I think especially if you have a young family, they're making that first purchase, buying their new house, it's a great time right then. Go in, talk to an estate planning attorney, get some documents in place to make sure you have everything prepared for your kids, right? And then I think if you're dealing with people who are downsizing, maybe they're reaching that point in their life, that's a great time to go get those documents reviewed again. We usually are planning slightly different at that phase than we are with people who are in their 20s and 30s. So seeing if we can tweak some things and update some things there. And then always the concept of maybe beneficiary deeds. That's another great way to avoid probate. We have another mistake people make, is to add their kids onto the title of their house as joint tenants, so that when they pass away, it just automatically transfers to their kid. And there's several problems with it, but the main one is the tax consequence. If you add somebody onto title with you, they're going to take it at your basis. So the capital gains that they would pay would be from what mom bought the house at in 1962, and you sell it in 2020. So a good chunk of money going to taxes there, where you could just do a beneficiary deed and they get a step up in basis to the date of death value. Again, $13 recording fee instead of $34,000 to the IRS.
And real estate prices have really changed from 1960 to 2020. Massive difference there. So planning for the estate can really make a big difference when it comes to what the tax situation or tax liability might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've heard, and I don't know how true this is, but Sam Walton had actually set up and planned for the estate and how things were going to transfer ownership with Walmart and the corporation, that actually saved the heirs a lot on taxes. I don't know if you know much about it or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of ways to save on taxes. And sometimes people are trying so hard to avoid probate, they accidentally subject themselves to extensive taxes. And sometimes probate's the least expensive way to go. We want to probate it. It's going to be better for you. So Yeah, and I think anytime if you're selling property or helping someone buy property, and you see that who's buying it is maybe not the people who are going to live in there, that's a good opportunity to send them to an estate planning attorney. If they're buying it as an investment, they might want to consider putting it into an LLC for some asset protection. If it's mom's buying it, but son's going to live in it, there's some things we can do there again to protect her from liability, because if son doesn't shovel the walks and somebody slips and falls and mom's name's on it. So anytime you're dealing with those scenarios, there's some things we can put in place to help them.
So really, it's early conversations so that you can custom tailor make the plan as to how it fits the individual family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, as a young, I'm 35, I still consider myself young. I hear estate planning and I think, well, that's just something for really wealthy people that have, millions and millions in the bank. Without getting into every scenario is going to be a little bit different, but what's the cost typically run? I mean, I'm assuming it has to be affordable if we're talking to 20-year-olds.
Right. So I think if we're dealing with young people who don't have children yet and they don't have sizable assets, you're talking about $500 for an estate plan. If we're talking about, a married couple looking for just a trust to get their kids to a certain age, we call that, a lot of times we can just do a testamentary trust with that, probably $1,500. And then when we're getting to the age, that's for a couple. If we get to the age where we have a couple who's looking at doing more of a lifelong joint revocable trust, doing lifetime distributions to their kids, legacy planning, trying to protect those assets for their kids, you're looking more at like $3,000.
Okay. So all relatively affordable, not, dozens of thousands of dollars just to get started.
Right.
Now, I know when my wife and I sat down and had a conversation with the life insurance, that was a really tough conversation. It was hard for me to get her to want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Very emotional time. So any advice for somebody in my situation who their spouse may not want to have the conversation for just bringing up that topic?
Yeah. Yeah, there are a few people who it's very difficult for them to even broach the subject. And interestingly, my grandmother's the same way. And so it took a lot of convincing, and my grandfather finally got her into my office. We did their estate plan, signed it, and he passed away 2 days later. So now she really doesn't want to talk about it because she's pretty sure the more you talk about it, it brings them around a lot more consequences. So generally, we try to keep it pretty light. We use a lot of stick figures in our pictures. I typically bring up examples and scenarios that are really far-fetched. They can still get the point and they can relate it back home, but I don't relate it to their home. And so I think that helps out. I think trying to keep it a little bit lighter. It is hard to discuss our own demise. Yeah. But a part of estate planning too is while we're alive. People forget about that. I think the most important documents we sign are the powers of attorney and the living will, because we're still alive. And if I'm in the hospital suffering from an injury from the garage door falling on my head, I want to know that I'm going to have a house to come home to and the pipes aren't frozen because someone was able to pay the electricity and the water bill while I was gone and manage things. And if I happen to be on life support, I have some opinions about how I want that to proceed. So I think those are more important than the other documents because you're dead with the other ones. So.
Yeah, at that point, I don't really care.
Yeah, right? Whatever happens, happens.
It's good to know going into it, but after the fact, not much I can do about it. Yeah, definitely have some opinions, and I think everybody would have their opinions as to what happens on life support.
Yes.
I know my dad's very explicitly told me many times, and I don't really have siblings to contest with that.
Yeah.
But still, that's a hard thing to do. But knowing and seeing it written certainly alleviates some of that concerns if my dad's ever in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
So anything we haven't quite covered on that you feels relevant towards real estate that you'd like to touch on before we just kind of wrap up this live video?
Yeah. The other thing to remember is that if you have deeded timeshares or mineral rights, those are real estate. Those also would require probate if we didn't have those titled properly or with a beneficiary deed or something like that. People forget about those. Oh. And that's always awkward when you have to go open probate for a mineral right that's worth $1,500 in Will County. Or sometimes people collect property. I don't know if you've ran into those where they'll have little plots of land. We get those up around the Fair Play area a lot. and they're not worth a lot of money. And so it's really frustrating when we have to open probate to get those out. And sometimes it's a group of people who went in together and bought that plot of land. And so now 3 of them have passed away and we have to open 3 probates to get this $2,000 plot of land. So thinking about things like that, just making sure we have them titled right and use the beneficiary deeds, use a trust, use an LLC to avoid all those things.
Yeah. So, moral of the story here from this is have the conversation early. It sounds like have the conversation kind of often as life changes and different scenarios come up, and set yourself up in a position where, one, quality of life may be impacted as we talk about, the scenario where a garage fell on your head, right? The garage door, whatnot,
Yeah.
and coming back home to
Yeah.
not frozen pipes, have a place to come back. And what happens if you're on life support? And of course, what happens with taxes and real estate as everything moves on. So
Right.
Really, I want to say thank you again. This has been beneficial for me. I hope it's been beneficial for you. Definitely reach out, get us connected, or reach out and connect with us. We can connect you with the estate planning company so that you can get that moving forward. I'll have a conversation, I'm sure, with my wife about getting that set up because it's one that needs to happen for sure. So,
Absolutely.
and Tammy, thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. See you guys.